Welcome to my bookshelf tour. I want to tell you a little bit about what you're going to see on this bookshelf tour. A lot of different genres of book, and the reasons for that is because I like to read a wide variety of books. So on this bookshelf tour, you're going to see a lot of fantasy, some young adult, you're going to see some romance, some self-help, some thriller, and some classics as well. I grew up in the UK. I moved to the US when I was 25, and I was unable to bring all the books that I've amassed from the UK to the US. So there's a lot that's missing from this bookshelf, and every time I go home, what I do is I pack up some of those books and I bring them over bit by bit by bit. So over the last 6 or 7 years, I've been slowly bringing a bookshelf that originated in the UK over to the US, whilst adding books to that as well. And on top of the books I just mentioned, as well as the romance ones, are my wife's books as well, which are included in this bookshelf tour. So it's going to be eclectic. Let's jump into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in the top corner, and alongside there being a bunch of books up here, there's also a lot of extra like trinkets and things that I've picked up as well. So I'll talk you through those. Some of them mean something to me, some of them are just random and I thought they looked really cool. So starting in this top left corner, these are some books that I bought across from the UK. They are a series by an author called Darren Shan, and he actually puts himself as the main character in there. And they're basically about him becoming a vampire. And they're young adult, and I thought they were amazing. Now, I am not the most aesthetic book collector, although I have a lot of appreciation for a good looking book. And as you can see from this series, I purchased the first 6 individually, and then I purchased 3 of them together in one book, and then I purchased the last 3 as well. But I've read this series a million times because I fell in love with it as a kid. One of the things that really made me fall in love with it was the creepiness on the front of these. And every single one has like a new creepy thing on the front that's related to the story. And although it wasn't like horror because it's young adult, it was kind of in that direction, which was really enjoyable. A bunch of vampires, a bunch of magic, and humans thrown in there as well. I'd say I've easily read this series 20 plus times. The next thing on this side, on the top shelf, it really shows how eclectic my collection is. So I also have all of the tragedies by Shakespeare. Now, although this isn't a book that I've read from back to front at all, I've just kind of gone in, read a little bit and jumped back out. It's definitely one of the most beautiful books that's on my bookshelf. It's really got a classic look to it with no cover here. It's all just like embroidered essentially. You have Shakespeare, the tragedies on here, and then you also have like a gold filament on the pages as well. And this one was actually bought for me by my wife and mother-in-law, and it's probably the most beautiful one on the bookshelf. And sandwiched in between a young adult British author's horror fantasy, alongside the tragedies by William Shakespeare, is a soccer boot that is signed by, or a football boot I should say, which is signed by my favourite Manchester United player of all time, which is Wayne Rooney. And while we're on the things that aren't books on here, if you can see this top shelf, what I have is I have a Viking horn, where you can put beer inside of it and things you would like to drink from. I also have some kind of, it looks like it's Buddhist, but I'm not even certain, something very Zen, very chi. I put that on top of the bookshelf. I like to imagine that she's in the zone with me while I'm reading. And then I have Julius Caesar, a bust of him, which I actually got from, I got this from Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas when we went there. And then finally up here, I have 2 of these. One of them's further down the bookshelf. It's like a jade statue. I have absolutely no idea what it's from or where it's from, but it looks very Asian. And I just thought it was beautiful. So we added that onto the bookshelf as well. So on the other side of the top shelf, we mainly have things that were read by my wife. So me and my wife, she wasn't a huge reader, but because I do so much, I feel like I got her into it. And some of our favorite things to do are to read together. And we also love going to the bookshops to go and find books as well. Locally, we have the Barnes & Noble. That's what we go to the most. And I think my wife's favorite part is probably buying the books, if I'm honest. But she does sit down and she does read them, and it is a wide variety of books that she does end up reading. Some of her favorites are up here on this top shelf. It's a mixture of like thrillers, crime books, romance, and then probably those are the main ones up there. Some of her favorites, I know she's a big Colleen Hoover fan, which isn't a surprise. A lot of people love Colleen Hoover. Of Colleen Hoover, her favorite is Verity. And then this one here, It Ends With Us. We actually went to go see this in the movie theater as well. I hadn't read the book, the movie was quite good. She had read the book and she really enjoyed it in the movie theater also. Another one of her favorites is this one here, which is Mindhunter. This is kind of like it's like a non-fiction book almost about how they started the FBI and a lot of interviews that they did with serial killers so that they could subsequently get into the mindset of a serial killer to capture them. So if you like that kind of thing and crime documentaries and the serial killer documentaries, that would probably be a really good one for you. So as we go down a level, we more come to the types of books that I've been reading for this YouTube channel, which is essentially more fantasy and a little bit of science fiction. So as we go through here, we have the Brandon Sanderson Mistborn trilogy. The Mistborn trilogy I have here is paperbacks and they're actually really pretty. So these I believe are actually quite new, this like cover versions. The books are amazing, I really enjoyed them, and it was my first dip into the Cosmere, which is something that I am fully and 100% lost in right now. And if you too like to read fantasy and you're into the Cosmere and things like that, then watch the rest of the videos on my channel. I do a lot of read-alongs where I read a bit, read a couple of hundred pages, talk about what's happened, and then try and guess what's happening next, and it's been so much fun to do. Next along here we have some books by Joe Abercrombie. Joe Abercrombie's books are much more, they're called grimdark. I think that's the official name for the type of books that they are. I think his writing is so much fun, and there's a few reasons. I think number one, his writing is so much fun because you really don't know where the story is going. The story doesn't always end positively. It doesn't always end terribly, although it often does. And it just seems like the journey is much more important than the destination and the final payoff, because the final payoff sometimes doesn't ever happen. He also writes some of the greatest characters that I've ever read. I can't think of a character that I love reading more than Sand Danglocter. He is miserable, intelligent, hilarious, grim, ruthless, all of it put together. But the main thing about Joe Abercrombie's books are they're extremely poetic. The poetry inside of the chapters is amazing. You'll have like a bold statement at the start of a chapter, and then you'll have a winding exploration of that statement just through our characters, and then by the end the statement will be completely null and void, or we'll be looking it upside down and on its head because of what's occurred during the chapter, and it's fantastic. Next up we have a couple of books by Con Iggulden. Con Iggulden is an author that really punctuated my young adult reading. He does a lot of taking non-fiction, so people like Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan and some others, taking the facts of their story and colouring it with fiction throughout. So he has this series here, which is the Wolf of the Plains. I can't remember the actual name of it. It might be Conqueror. I think it is Conqueror. And this one is about Genghis Khan's life. I've probably read these books 20 plus times as well. These were really a staple of my childhood and I loved reading them. Next up, we have the Unfinished Trilogy by Patrick Rothfuss. Patrick Rothfuss is a very controversial person, not because of who he is as a person. I have no idea who he is as a person, but simply because he hasn't managed to get round to finishing these books. It's been an extremely long time, and I think a lot of people are frustrated by it. I am also frustrated, and the reason for that is because I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think that the second one of these books, A Wise Man's Fear, is the best book I've ever read, objectively. And the reason for that is because the care and craft that went into every single thing inside of that book was incredible. It was top tier, 10 out of 10. And even though I don't love the characters, in fact, there's a lot of the characters that I don't particularly like, the story is so well crafted, so well put together, the world is so well put together, and the characters are so balanced and unbalanced in a realistic way that if anybody asks me what my favorite book is of all time, especially in the fantasy genre, I have to direct them to that book because it truly is a masterpiece. And perhaps that's part of the reason why he hasn't managed to get around to finishing it, because how do you tie together something that has been so beautiful in a satisfactory way? And it's a difficult thing to do. A lot of authors fail at that, and maybe that's part of the reason why he hasn't managed to get it done. But who knows? I don't know Patrick Rothfuss. I don't know anything about him. All I know is that I love the first two books, and I wish he would finish the last one. At the end of the shelf, we have the Night Angel trilogy. I have all three of the first books rolled into one here, and this is another series that I read over and over and over again as a young adult. I loved the characters, I loved the world, I love the brutalness of the storyline, the magic, how it all tied together. And I also like that, you know, it's not the greatest storytelling in the entire world, but it excited me and it was enough, and I really enjoyed it. Next to it, we have this sequel. This sequel is the start of the Kyla Chronicles, as far as I'm aware. I did a review of this book. It did not hold up as an adult, and I don't know. I mean, I've gone back and I've reread the originals and I still enjoyed them just as much, but I don't know how much of that is nostalgia. This one here, when I read it, it was just very convoluted. I felt like there was so much happening that it was almost boring, if that makes sense. And yeah, it was a bit of a letdown. However, it did end in a spot where I think if that feedback is fed to the author, then potentially he can take it from this ending here and move on. And I loved the original trilogy enough that I will read the next one that comes out. So onto the next side, next shelf down, we have a few classics from my childhood and then some that I've read more recently. Starting over here, we have the Inheritance cycle. I don't know if you can see it because of the glare, but we have Eragon, Eldest, Brisinga, and Inheritance, The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, which was like a set of small stories afterwards. And then we have the most recent in the world, which is Murtagh. These books, Eragon, Eldest, Brisinga, Inheritance, I loved. I've read them a lot. Didn't particularly like the ending, if I'm honest. I thought it was quite weak. But the world building, the dragons, the magic, fantastic. And there's a lot of characters and storylines that I really enjoyed in this series. Having gone back and read it as an adult, it doesn't capture me in the same way or even entertain me in the same way that a lot of other books do. I just don't think the author had it like geared towards adults, and I don't think it was intelligent enough to keep me involved there or fast paced enough to make up for the lack of depth in a way. But I still enjoyed it on a reread, and there are some sections of the book that are absolutely fantastic. If you're big into this series, you will know what I'm talking about when there's a section on ants, when he's learning from Aromis in one of the elves in the forest, and it is just peaceful. So good, and I always love that section of the book. The most recent one, Murtagh, I wasn't a massive fan of, and I think maybe that's just because I read this one as an adult. It came out, I think, either this year or last year, and I think it's probably just as good as some of these other ones here, but as an adult, I just didn't have that nostalgia factor because I read it as an adult, and therefore it just came through as like a relatively average book. Next up, we have these classics, the Harry Potter series, another series that I've read over and over and over again, and I have a special place in my heart for Harry Potter for a few reasons. Number one, this is the first book, and in the US it's called The Sorcerer's Stone, but in the UK it's called The Philosopher's Stone. And when I eventually get the books over here, I have a lot of the original copies. Would they be worth any money? No, because they're absolutely battered from a 6 and 7 year old boy reading it and spilling things on it and just, you know, not treating it as a collector's item. But there was a lot of love put into those books. This was the first book that I really remember sitting down and reading and being like, I'm transported into a new world, and it was amazing. So I was born in 1994, and this came out in 1994, but I think I read it when I was 6 or 7 years old, so around the year 99 or 2000. And this was what kicked me head over heels into the world of reading, and I never really looked back after that. Plus, what was magical was I was young enough that when the fourth book came out, no, I think it was just before the fifth book came out, the first movie came out, and I remember going with my mum and going and watched that movie, and it was, the first movie especially is so true to the first book, and because the first book is a lot smaller, it manages to fit in all the little quirks and exciting things about Hogwarts and the world, whereas the rest of the books have to get so plot focused that they don't have enough time to capture all of the little magical things about Hogwarts and what that world's all about. And I just remember thinking, this is amazing. It's one of the best film adaptations of a book I've ever seen, and I think it will forever be that, especially the first one. And then on the end here, we have this series by Scott Lynch, and I'm not going to say the whole title because there's a swear word in the title, but it starts with The Lies of Locke Lamora. The Lies of Locke Lamora. So the first book, The Lies of Locke Lamora, was really, really good. It had me hooked in. I massively enjoyed it. The second book was pretty good as well, and then the third one, not so much. So I do think it's gotten worse as it's gone along. However, some things you would love about this series is it's complicated. So it will have you guessing. There's riddles inside of riddles, inside of storylines, inside of riddles. The characters and the dialogue is fantastic. The dialogue is very much like, it's intelligent dialogue. They go back and forwards, and each book has a different element to it. So the second one was set on the high seas, and the third one is set within like a setting of the theatre almost. So each book brings something brand new, but unfortunately, in my opinion, they have gotten a little bit worse as they've gone along. However, I would definitely be reading the next one when that comes out. Okay, so you join me at a pretty special section of the bookshelf. This is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and it's a collection of 13 or 14 books, depending on if you read the prequel or not, and it is fantastic. This series it took me a really long time to read. I can't remember how long. I think it was like 8 months or something like that, because I was making videos on the books as I was going through. So I would stop after I read a certain amount and talk about it, and you'll find those videos on my page. This series has by far the best payoff. Partly I think that's due to the length of the series, and partly just because of the depth of the journey and the world that it takes you on. It is, man, it's a journey. And there's some parts of this series that is a bit of a slog, as any fan who's read it will tell you. There's a book and a half, in my opinion, that maybe don't even need to be there. But that is the only downside. Outside of that, you're going to get to know characters in this series better than you know some of the friends that you've known for a long time. You're going to go on journeys with them. They're going to become unrecognizable to you by the end of the time you've been reading it. And you will, when I finished reading this series, I had to go for a walk. I've just felt all of these emotions, and I felt so satisfied by the end as well. And it's rare that somebody can build such a wide web of world and it be so interesting and so fascinating and so capturing and so deep, and yet they tie it off at the end incredibly. And this has to go out to two authors, because it was started by Robert Jordan, and the vast majority of the brilliance of this series, in fact 99% of the brilliance of this series, has to be handed to Robert Jordan. However, he died before we could finish the series, and Brandon Sanderson took over, and although a lot of the end was already done, he put his stamp on it and he did a fantastic job. And that was actually my first introduction to Brandon Sanderson, was him finishing off Robert Jordan's work. So if you're looking for not necessarily a challenge but a project, something that isn't going to be super easy to get through but will be massively rewarding and you will enjoy the journey, then this is the series for you. I can't recommend it highly enough. So on the other side of this row, I should say, it starts with some of my wife's books again. So a couple that she really recommends. The first one is One of Us is Dead. This one, she loves watching Bravo and like the Housewives of here and the Housewives of there and the Housewives of everywhere. So she said this one was like a good mixture of like a thriller and the Housewives of here, there and everywhere. So if you like that kind of stuff, this is definitely one for you. Another one she recommends is Never Saw Me Coming. The reason why she loves this one is because you really get into like the mindset of a killer and the psychology behind it. So again, if you're into like serial killer documentaries or just crime documentaries, this would be a really good one for you as well. On this shelf, I also have more thriller-based things as well. And the first ones I have here are by James Patterson, which is, he's a very, very popular author. I know they made a couple of movies out of the first couple of books as well. So I read 1, 2, 3, 4. So I read the first 4 of his books. I did enjoy them. And the only reason I read 4 is because I think there's like 20 of this series. Is after 4 they do get quite formulaic, like you know kind of what's going to happen, and all the twists that could have happened I feel like have already happened. So although I did enjoy it, it was fun, I did like the characters, there's only so many times I can read like the same formula and over and over and over and over again. But it was great. If you like thriller, definitely one to go for, and I think he's one of the most sold authors of all time, especially in that genre. So you've probably already heard of him, but if you haven't, get stuck in. Next up on this side is kind of like the British version of James Patterson, I would say. These are books by Andy McNab. There is, similarly to the James Patterson one, I think there's like 15 of these, and I've read more than I have on the shelf. I have a lot of them at home as well in the UK. This is another example of me not caring about the aesthetics of the bookshelf. So I have different versions of the book. I have a hardback, a large paperback. I have these new ones that came out so you could get them all in looking the same. And then I have these are like the original ones that came out and mass prints, and yeah, what can I say? I just want to read the book basically. So the difference between Andy McNab and James Patterson is I actually don't know much about James Patterson as a person. Andy McNab was in the British SAS, and part of the reason why I love reading this is it's not about him as a police officer, it's about him as a deniable operator. And what a deniable operator is somebody who comes out of the SAS and then works for the government, but they go and do jobs where if something goes wrong, the government can deny that they ever sent them. It's very dangerous work. Is the writing amazing? No, it's not incredible. It's good enough. The reason why I like these books is you get a very strong insight into the minds of the humans who are in special forces. And the way they go about thinking about things and the way they go about doing things is so different to an everyday human, because they have just learned how to become the most efficient at getting what outcome they want. And they consider things that you would never consider. And all of that, because he's done the training, bleeds into the writing. And I feel like as I'm reading the books, I'm just learning things about special forces and about how these super efficient humans go about doing things. What are some examples? I can't think of a bunch of examples off the top of my head. A couple of things that spring to mind actually. So one is when they're on stakeout missions in other countries, etc., they every time their car's fuel gets to like 3/4 full, they'll go and fill it up. Because oftentimes, if it hits the fan, as they say, the person with the most gas in the car normally wins. So that means if you have to travel somewhere or go somewhere, or you get compromised and people are looking for you, you don't want to be stopping at gas stations. That's not the world's greatest example. There's a lot cooler things than that they do, but it's the first one that sprung to mind. So this section really is a hodgepodge mixture of everything. So on here we have a lot of like self-betterment and self-help books. The reason I have so many of these is because I do think it's important to try and get a bit better and adjust your thinking and push in certain directions. I work in sales, and I've been in a leadership position quite a lot of times, and I just think that it is good to try and develop and progress yourself, and you can't teach someone else if you're not learning yourself. I also feel like I'm a happier person when I'm learning something new. I just think it opens up your mind and gets you excited about the world around you, and that there's new things to learn. So that's why there's so many of these here. Would I recommend any of these? There's a few that I definitely would recommend. The first one would be this one here. So Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning isn't necessarily, I suppose it definitely is a self-betterment book. So this is about somebody who was in the Holocaust, and I forget the name of the man. I think it's something Frankl, because that's the author right there. Let me pull it out because he definitely deserves a shout out. Viktor E. Frankl. So this was about somebody who was in the Holocaust, and he essentially talks about some of the horrors that happened in the Holocaust, but the goal isn't that it's a horror-inducing book. What the goal is really, he does a lot of explaining about how no matter what is going on in your life, the human spirit can decide kind of what it looks for. And it's been a while since I read this book, so that might not be the best summary, but essentially it talks about that if you decide what the meaning is, and you decide if there is meaning in your life and what you can search towards. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, definitely give it a read. Or if you're going for a tough time and trying to figure out where your meaning is, it can give you a good idea of where to look for it or where to decide it is, which is a very empowering thought. Alrighty, so this shelf is broken. So one of the back bits isn't there. So if you put books on it or something heavy, then it falls through. So what I decided to put on here are different things instead. So here's the other one of those like jade looking statues that I had on the top. And down here we have a couple of wands from Harry Potter that my wife bought me. So we have the Elder Wand for all champion wizards. And then we also have Lord Voldemort's wands, which is very cool. Why did she get me Lord Voldemort's wands? Well, if I'm honest, I do end up rooting for the bad guy quite a lot of times in movies. I just think it's quite fun to do that. And it elongates the story if they keep winning. So Not that I love all the bad guys, don't get me wrong, I love a hero as well. But when I read the books of Harry Potter, I just thought Lord Voldemort was a very interesting character. And for those of you who are big Harry Potter fans, the sixth book was by far my favourite. And the reason it was by far my favourite is because we did so much of jumping into the pensive and learning about Lord Voldemort's history and his life and the things he did and how he created the Horcruxes and what he created the Horcruxes out of. And I just thought that was really, really, really interesting. Hence the reason why my wife decided to get me Voldemort's wand. But obviously I'm glad he lost in the end. Another thing we have in here is this, I don't know if this is a musket or how it works. Pretty neat. She bought this for me also. And that concludes that shelf of things that are cool but also light enough not to collapse the shelf. So this bottom shelf, when I started my YouTube channel, I initially started it just because I wanted to read more. And the channel has definitely morphed into a fantasy and sci-fi channel, partly because I love reading that, which I do, but partly just because that's what people enjoyed talking to me about the most on there, and I really enjoyed the community aspect of it. So these are some of the books that I read at the start of the channel, and I really loved reading them, and I'm going to go through some of them. And I read a lot of these types of books in between the fantasy ones. I just don't do as much posting about them on the channel, because I feel like we've built like a pretty strong fantasy community, and I'd just like to keep that going. So in this corner, it's a big mixture. On the very end there, we have a book by a guy called Ryan, is it Holiday or Holiday? Holiday. Ryan Holiday is very much focused on Stoicism, and he's built these, or written, I should say, authored a couple of books. So this one down here is The Obstacle is the Way. There's one that's called Discipline is Destiny, and there's also one that's called Ego is the Enemy. I keep one of these books on my nightstand pretty much at all times, and before bed, at least once or twice a week, I'll read a chapter of one of those books. And the reason why is because they're very digestible, they're fantastically written, and they're very simple ideals, and I just feel like the Stoicism ideals really calm me down and get me focused on what is important, which is what I can control, and what isn't important, which is what I can't control. So if those are things that you're interested in, those types of ideas, I can't recommend those books enough. It's not really a book I would sit and read all the way through and be like, wow, that's good, I feel like I've learned a lot. It's more like you read that chapter in the morning, you try and think about that chapter and put it into your day-to-day, and then you read it again at night, and then if you feel like you got some of it down, you do that, then you move on to the next chapter. If not, then you do the same thing with that as well. Next one is a book by Daniel Genius. This was a really interesting book. It's called Sentence. So he was sent to prison. I think it was a maximum security prison, but I can't remember. And he read 1,000 books while he's in prison. And what he did was he something that really stuck with me from the book is when he got in there, he, instead of disassociating and being like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in prison, because I think he was a drug addict and basically acted very much out of character to get money to fuel his habit. So when he was put in there with hardened criminals, he felt like he didn't deserve to be there, which probably a lot of people who go to prison think that. So he decided that he was going to look at it from this next 10 years of my life. I'm not in prison, I'm observing prisoners, and I'm going to write about it. And he's a very intelligent man. If you have that mixed with how many books he read and the types of books he read, he basically puts together what I think is a fantastic piece of work about his time in prison. And it was, yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's very different to other things that I've read. Down here we have The Human Son. That's kind of like a sci-fi book that was recommended by me to me from someone in England. A lot of fun to read. Leave out the tragic parts. That was a book by a granddad about his alcoholic son who was homeless. It's a true story, and he followed the stories of his son, put them together from all his friends on the street, and whipped up that book, which was, you do cry at the end. Then you have How Fascism Works. So I've always been interested in politics. This was an interesting kind of like a step-by-step on how fascism works, what the signs are, what the steps are, how you can look out for it, and why it is so effective as a political movement to put people into power. It very much feeds on fear and stereotypes. So really interesting read, very much enjoy reading that. Alongside here we have The The Great Experiment, Why Diverse Democracies Fall Apart and How They Can Endure. That was interesting, based on democracies. It was pretty heavy politics. It wasn't that fun to read, but it had some interesting concepts. We have the classic, How to Kill a Mockingbird. We have David Goggins, which was Can't Hurt Me. I thought that was a fantastic book, very motivating. It Takes What It Takes. Great book about getting your brain to neutral, so more of a self-help book. 1984. I would say 1984 is one of the best books I ever read. I thought it was amazing. I think some of the ideas in it are useful even today. What else do we have here? 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I've not finished that book. I like Jordan Peterson. I think he has some good stuff. It was so dense and difficult to read because of how intelligent the man is and the types of words he uses that I just never got around to finishing it, but I will at some point. Leo Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. I really enjoyed reading this book, but I only got halfway. I did not finish it. I'm going to finish it. It's an old book. It's a lot different to anything that's modern, so it's not as easy to read, but I do plan on reading Anna Karenina. I probably need to start it from the beginning, but I was very much enjoying it. Julius Caesar, big fan of Julius Caesar. Fahrenheit, and then this is another series by Con Iggulden. This series focused much more on Julius Caesar. Again, they don't match each other because half of them are left in England, half of them I brought over because I was reading them when I moved to the US actually. Fantastic, arguably better than the Genghis ones. I would say comfortably better than the Genghis Khan ones. Very good Con Iggulden work. All right, so this is the final part of the bookshelf. This is another hodgepodge, and me and my wife are moving house soon. When we move, we're gonna get a big fancy bookshelf so I can add on all the extra things that I don't have here that are on other bookshelves around the room. But this is obviously the vast majority of what I have. I also plan on going to England again soon so I can bring back a bunch of extra books there as well. But let's finish up here. So the Thursday Murder Club, this series my wife absolutely loved. It's set in England. I think they're making a movie of it, and it's 4 people in an old person's home who get really bored and end up going and solving mysteries and crimes. And I can't recommend it enough. My mum loved it, my wife loved it. Everybody who's read it seems to love it. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, jump straight in there. We also have another mixture of like books for self-help and autobiographies and this and that and the third. I'm not going to go through all of these, but something that my wife definitely recommended was Strange Sally Diamond. This was another one that she absolutely loved. And then this is an autobiography of a motorcycle rider who ended up becoming good friends with my dad. My dad ended up getting like a small page or 2 in the book, so he was very chuffed about that, and he sent it over to me as well. Outside of that, what I'm reading right now is the Stormlight Archive. If you've read it and you love it, jump onto my channel. I'm doing a read along currently, and we'd love to have you on there. So we have The Way of Kings, which I've already read, and then we have Words of Radiance, which I'm currently reading, which is fantastic. And then obviously we have Oathbringer and the rest of those books to come out as well. Outside of that, thank you so much for coming on my bookshelf tour with me. Compared to some of the other ones I've seen on YouTube, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing bookshelf tour, but these are the books that I love. There's a lot of love poured into these, and I will probably do these once a year so you can see the bookshelf grow, me recruit some of the old cherished books that I've left in the UK as I go back over the years, and you can see in which direction I start to read in the future. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.